Hey, it's 1 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The proceedings of this meeting will be recorded and made available on the internet. I'd like to move on to section 1.2 of our agenda, which is roll call, and I would ask our clerk, Jesse Clark, to please call the roll.
Thank you. Mayor Lamsett, are you present?
I am present.
Deputy Mayor Armstrong?
Present.
Councillor Franzen?
Present.
Councillor Braybrook?
Present.
Councillor Cadigan?
Present.
For staff, we have Donna Taggart, CIO Treasurer.
Present.
Evan Grieger, Director of Public Works.
Present.
Adele Arbor, Planner.
Present.
Bianca Dragicevic, Deputy Clerk.
Present.
Sarah Delamarter, Junior Planner.
Present.
Amber Novak, Legislative Coordinator, Executive Assistant to the CAO.
Present.
Barb Waldron, Director of Building and Planning, CBO.
Present.
Chastity Robertson, Deputy Treasurer.
Present.
And Jesse Clark, Director of Corporate Services, Clerk is present.
Okay, thank you very much, Jesse. Okay, we can move on to item 1.3 of our agenda, which is land acknowledgement and moment of reflection. We respectfully acknowledge that Trent Lakes and Peterborough County are located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaty First Nations, which include Alderville, Beausoleil, Curve Lake, Georgina Island, Hiawatha, Rama, and Scugog Island First Nation. Trent Lakes respectfully acknowledges that the Williams Treaty First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. We will now take a moment to reflect on these principles and our duties and responsibilities as members of council. Thank you. We can move on to item 2 of our agenda, which is the disclosure of pecuniary interest. If anyone has a pecuniary interest in any item on the agenda, please discuss it now, disclose it now, or anytime during the meeting prior to discussing anything that you have an interest in. Seeing no hands, we can move on to item 3 of our agenda, which is the approval of the agenda. See, Deputy Mayor Armstrong, go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, and I had Councillor Franzen for a seconder. Any conversation? Okay, I see none. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion is carried. The agenda is approved as circulated. Okay, we can move on to item 4 of our agenda, which is the adoption of minutes. We have 3 minutes to adopt. We can do it all in one motion, or we can do them one at a time, whatever council prefers. I see Councillor Braybrook.
Make a motion to adopt all 3.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? I see Councillor Cadigan for a seconder. Any conversation? If none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. Okay, we can move on to item 5 of our agenda, which is committees and boards. We'll move on to item 5.1, which is Police Services Board. I'm prepared to make a motion. We can do the item 5.1 and 5.2 together if we choose. Go ahead, Councillor Braybrook.
I'll make a motion to receive both.
Okay. Do I have a seconder for that motion? The Deputy Mayor Armstrong for a seconder. Any conversation? I'm seeing none. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. Okay, we can move on to item 5.3 of our agenda, which is liaison reports for council boards and committees. Does anyone have any conversation? Any items? I'm seeing none. We can move on to item 6 of our agenda, which is statutory public meeting pursuant to the Planning Act, which we have none. Item 7, which is business arising out of the statutory public meeting that we did not have. So we have none. Presentations, we have none for today. And we can move on to item 9 of our agenda, which is delegations. We can move on to 9.1, which is Mary Webb. Would you please come up and feel free to go ahead with your presentation?
Yeah, I'm just going to open.
Go ahead.
I'm Ted Spence, and as you know, I'm a cottager here in Trent Lakes. Earlier this year, I was invited to join the Shoreline Conservation Initiative group, and the effort of Doug Wellman here and Mary Webb, who I'm happy to introduce to you, both members of our committee. They've been in existence, as Mary will explain, for some time, and they have made presentations to the other surrounding municipalities, the other townships. And I was urging them to come here. I did organize them to make a presentation as the board of the Cavendish ratepayers. And they got a good reception there, and they were encouraged to come here. So we're here, and I'm really happy to introduce Mary and Doug. They both happen to be from Anstruther Lake, cottagers on Anstruther Lake, but they've been very active much more broadly than that in their communities. So Mary, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ted.
You can
Thank
say anything else you want to say about yourself.
Don't need to say anything about myself.
Uh,
Thank you.
That's like me with the council. I don't have to tell them who I am.
Welcome, Mary. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having us. So who are we? We'll never know. Just a minute.
I just want to remind you, you have 10 minutes to do your presentation. For delegation.
That's great. Is there a reason
Clock doesn't start till the
I
slides
can't
change.
advance the slide?
I think it started when you started speaking, Ted.
Is it not working? You might just have to advance through them upstairs.
Then you know what? Next slide, please. Will they hear
One of the
me?
things you can do is, if you do this,
Oh, super. Sure.
you
Great.
just proceed forward arrow.
Oh, okay. What am I pressing? Just a minute. I'm sorry, what am I pressing? Forward to the arrows?
See this forward?
Right. But I've gone a little too far forward. You know what, we're fine. We're good.
Now
We're
it's
good.
frozen.
Okay. So who are we? Well, there's a shoreline conservation initiative for Peterborough County. We were founded by the Environment Council for Clear, Stony and White Lakes in 2021, and they are now our partner. We're actually just a nonprofit with 7 volunteers that are really passionate about preserving and enhancing natural shorelines. And we are working with 5 townships. We've done presentations to North Kawartha, 1 to Havelock, Belmont, Methuen, 2 to North Kawartha, Selwyn, and Douro-Dummer, and we're really happy to be here today. Our focus for 23-24 is to broaden our shoreline education effort and also to put additional effort into the details of how we can have a more effective shoreline protection policy. On natural heritage issues, we work regularly with the Federal Department of Fisheries, the 2 provincial ministries, and the county staff, as well as we're very lucky in Southern Ontario to have a number of excellent nonprofits. Next slide. So, and I should have mentioned that, in fact, all the pictures on these slides, except for this one, are pictures that either enrage or sadden us. They're of damaged shorelines across the county and shorelines that need remediation and are negatively impacting the health of the lake. So this idyllic picture represents the natural heritage contribution to our quality of life and to the local income and the tax base. And I think that there's a rising challenge here for municipalities to protect shorelines. And that's in large part due to the increasing pace and size of residential development on waterfronts. And it's also due to changes in the provincial policies that are putting more of the environmental responsibility onto municipalities such as yourselves. Next slide. So while rising, we look at lake health as a public good. And therefore, if you're a waterfront property owner, you have obviously an interest in your own property, but you also have a mutual interest and responsibility for the health of the lake. And that's really key. When we look at the health of lakes, there are 2 key factors. One is the septic systems, the effectiveness. The other is preserving natural shorelines. And in that 30-meter setback from the high water mark and the littoral zone, which is the first 3 meters of the water, there's about 4/5 of the lake life. And so we've urged as a committee that shorelines be viewed as a natural heritage feature that deserve the same respect and protection that a waterland, a wetland would receive. It's also really key that we have greater public acknowledgement of shorelines. And again, that is rising, but not perhaps as fast as we'd hoped. Why would natural heritage designation be so important? Well, for one thing, it would make the goal of preserving 75% of the shoreline buffer in a natural state, it would make it not ambitious, but essential. And the other reason is that it would affirm the ecological importance of shorelines. The next slide. So you're aiming, I think, to protecting your shorelines in an effective and equitable way that has the buy-in by the public. But actually, a lot of the sources of natural shoreline complicate creating that policy. One thing is history, that cottage development in the past was often too dense on some lakes, grandfathered buildings are too close. And perhaps most frustrating of all is when we have property owners without any consultation with municipal staff, clear-cut trees, alter the shape or the slope of the shore, and do damage to the lake that is not easily reversible. Now, if you move to the next slide, one of the ways, and you have a tree canopy policy and the natural vegetation, and it certainly is it's good because you're prohibiting injury to a significant tree on a lot that is subject to Planning Act application, but that doesn't protect the shoreline lots that aren't under that designation, that haven't applied. So we look to broaden the shoreline education, and one of our asks to you is to consider creating a brochure, a concise brochure that talks about how natural shorelines can be preserved and also restored. In the appendix, I included two things of the specific information that's needed. If we provide people with some of the shoreline science, not in huge depth, but just so that they know the interconnection between lake zones. They know that an altered shoreline can have a huge percentage of runoff that has a high level of nitrates that impact the lake. If people understand those things, and they'll understand better the specific provisions in your shoreline policy. So we've included those two pieces as examples of the specific information we think you need. And we've also included the brochure of North Kawartha. Now, this brochure was updated. It's just a sample of what you might want to do, something like that. It was updated in 2022 after our first deputation to that council. What would you do with the brochure? Well, you'd distribute it, not just in print form, but also because digitally and through social media. And then there's a strategic distribution. You know, it would be great if the municipality could distribute it to new waterfront property owners when the transfer of the deed takes place, so that they're informed about the importance of shorelines. It's also important to distribute that brochure to the local professionals that are interacting with waterfront property owners. You know, the real estate agents and the lawyers that are involved in the sale transaction, but then the contractors and tree cutting groups and the landscapers, and who all work with the property owner on changes. Next slide, please. Another option for your council is to further encourage shoreline restoration. Now, in fact, you have been doing that. And I've heard from the Kawartha Lake Stewards Association that your municipality does work with them. And certainly you've had a number of lakes that have participated in the Love Your Lake program by Watersheds Canada. You could also provide an incentive. This is something that Havelock, Belmont, Methuen is doing, and the incentive can be very modest, but it could be to a lake association or a group or even an individual property owner that's undertaking a significant shoreline restoration. Why is restoration important? Well, one thing is that it raises public awareness. And the second thing is that there's an equity component here. Against a backdrop of cumulative shoreline damage, and also looking to stricter regulations for new development, there is some justice in pursuing greater shoreline restoration on existing lots. Next slide. Yes. Thank you. Education is essential, but it's not the only thing. There was a survey of lake associations and planners and the elected officials, and they basically said we needed greater shoreline stewardship and emphasized the comprehensive shoreline protection in official plans and bylaws. Now, you do have a 30-meter setback outlined in your bylaw, and you have additional provisions when there's a building at a 10-meter setback. But the other part of shoreline legislation is how effectively is it being monitored and enforced? Next slide, please. So I'd like to just briefly review 3 examples. The County of Haliburton put in a tree preservation bylaw in 2012 that's a bit more comprehensive than yours. And then they adopted, after 5 years, a shoreline preservation bylaw just this year. Their extended process was too extended, and there's a lot of lessons in that, which is why I included J.L. Richards' final report. But they also have a number of very good points. And in some cases, they had to compromise. They had to compromise and accept a 20-meter setback, not a 30-meter. The other thing was but they have a very effective enforcement mechanism, and that is that contractors pay the enforcement penalty as well as owners. The Township of Muskoka Lakes, well, it's a really interesting one, because how high an enforcement penalty do you have to set in order to affect decisions when you have such wealthy property owners in many cases? And the other issue is that for Muskoka and Georgian Bay, site plan controls can be an extremely good way of looking comprehensively at a site and the environmental impact. But unfortunately, recent provincial legislation no longer allows site plan controls for lots that have 10 cottages or more. And the final thing is Lake of Bays, who they were able to adopt much faster because they'd already gotten public buy-in through their recent official plan, and they do a holistic approach. So the next slide. I raised the provincial policy environment only because we're concerned that the natural heritage protection is now less, and that the natural heritage section of the proposed provincial planning statement is disturbingly vague. So on the next slide, even though the Peterborough County official plan is in a bit of a hiatus, near term, we'd like you to consider the shoreline preservation brochure. Midterm, we'd like you to review your legislation. And is the shoreline protection that you've had in that legislation sufficient to protect shorelines for the next decade or so? And as well, are your monitoring and enforcement practices, are they sufficient to really deter shoreline damage? So thank you for your patience. I know I'm right on 10 minutes or over. All that, it really was a summary of what we've been talking with the other townships. And only 2, North Kawartha and Selwyn, are proceeding with shoreline legislation at the moment, but they are proceeding. And if you need more information, you know how to reach us.
Well, thank you very much. Mary, are any members of the council have any questions?
Yes, that's on Ketchakona Lake.
That's in Trent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councilor Friends.
Yeah, I would support anything that we could do to enhance shorelines, naturalize shoreline. I realize that Kawartha Conservation Authority is doing a little bit, but there's a broad area and there's very limited funds, and they're doing it 50-50. And I think maybe our municipality should adopt a similar kind of program and have it in the budget for 2021.
I was surprised how small HBM's was and what they thought they could accomplish with it. It's only 10,000 a year,
Yeah.
which is still material, but it's not
Yeah,
that much.
and that was kind of what I was thinking.
And yeah, there's a 50-50 match and the grants are only up, the
Yep.
individual grants are only up to 1,000 and they expect many of them to be less than 1,000.
Yeah.
Please make sure your conversation goes through the chair, please.
Oh, my apologies.
It's okay. No, it's all good.
Apologize.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Armstrong has a question.
Comment and a question.
Right.
Thank you, Mayor Lamside. Thanks very much for the presentation. It is an important issue. I think this council has talked before about the importance, particularly of septic health, which is why we do our inspections every year, as well as shoreline protection. And we haven't probably done enough on that score. We all were emailed a picture of an absolute tragic situation where somebody clear cut their entire lot leading down to the lake, which is just abysmal.
Yep.
And apparently there's nothing illegal about that. So I guess my proposal would be, and we did have a motion deferred to look at a stricter tree protection bylaw, which kind of never got done last term. So that was in the mix. But what I would like to propose, if I can, as a motion, and I'll wordsmith this, is that we direct staff to look at the opportunities for integrating education into some of our processes. As an aside, that might be simply like taking the FOCA brochure and distributing it, et cetera, et cetera. So number one, so not a lot of work, simply integrating it into our processes. And the second thing is to explore bylaws which would address tree protection as well as shoreline protection. And I'll leave it at that. The only other comment I want to make is we need to be smart about it. Halliburton community went through an absolute horrific experience over 5 years. There were battles and fights, and we do not want to get into that. So we want to do it smartly and quickly and effectively. I'm still not sure that what they passed is effective. And there's dispute about who actually enforces it, whether it's the county or the municipality. So I think there's lots we can learn from their experience. But I think the first step is to have staff do a review for us of the opportunities that we have and also benchmark some of the best practices in other municipalities. So I'll make that a motion.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Right. Councillor Franzen for a seconder. Any conversation? Go ahead, Councillor Franzen.
Just one comment. I think the enforcement portion of it is the most difficult portion. We can bring all the legislation that we can, but our problem is enforcing the bylaws we even have now.
Thank you, Councillor Franzen. I think I have a comment that it's, for me, it's more about educating. If you educate people, they're not going to do that. You're teaching, you move to a beautiful lake, you want to protect that lake, you don't want to destroy it, because if everybody clear cuts everything, our lakes are going to warm up faster, there's going to be more contaminants go into the lake, so we need to protect that shoreline. So I appreciate Deputy Mayor Armstrong making a motion.
Can I make a short comment?
Please do. Part of the presentation. Yeah.
So I see the effectiveness of the Halliburton bylaw in three areas. Number one is the permit. You need a permit. So it's not a bylaw that is complaint driven. So you need a permit if you're going to do landscaping, a significant amount of landscaping up 20 meters from the high water mark. And then the second thing is the penalty involves the contractor. And I think that's where very quickly you'll only need one example in our local communities, in our local contractors. The contractor gets fined, and it'll be similar to a contractor who tries to do something without a building permit. Contractors abide by the rules.
Thank you for your comment. Any other questions or comments? I like the way one of our building officials phrased it. You've done that work without the benefit of a permit. So I think you hit that on the nail. Okay, any other comments? I will call for a vote on that motion. All in favor? That motion has carried. Thank you very much for your presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, we can move on to item 9.2 of our agenda. And Catherine Van Beek, would you like to come and take the chair?
Hopefully I can
Please.
figure out the
You're a
PowerPoint
delegate.
presentation.
I think staff have it right under control.
Yep, I'll just say, I apologize. It's going to say, you'll hear me say next slide many, many times. All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. I appreciate the time I've been given to speak to you on behalf of my client today. And I do want to reassure you that despite the comprehensive nature of this presentation, I won't be speaking at length to each slide, just to be mindful of your time. I just wanted to ensure that council had all of the information in front of you. Next slide, please. To summarize, file 2108 is requesting a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment from the shoreline residential private access zone to the tourist commercial exception zone to allow for the redevelopment of the property in the form of 3 rental cottages and an accessory dwelling where my client will reside. Site-specific relief includes the minimum lot area, minimum water yard for the dwelling and the septic system, the accessory dwelling height, and frontage on a public road. Next slide, please. For additional context, and I know I kind of was given last minute notice on whether or not you can disclose these or not. These are some aerial photographs that should have been included in this presentation with respect to the existing built environment of the property and some of the adjacent properties. So whether or not council can take a look at those, they're at least there for your review. As a result of the comments received at the meeting in May, my client agreed to amend the proposed development by reducing the ground floor area of the rental cottages from 1,000 square feet, the ground floor area from 1,000 square feet to 900 square feet. Please note that zoning relief isn't required for the size of the rental cabins or the accessory dwelling, and that with respect to lot coverage, the proposed development will be 8.28%, the permitted 15%. Next slide, please. I would like to reiterate to council that a number of supporting studies have been prepared by qualified professionals and have subsequently been peer reviewed and deemed acceptable by the municipality in support of the application. And those are listed there for your review. Next slide, please. Again, I will not go into detail about the timeline of this application. However, it's been over 3 years since this proposed development was first introduced to municipal staff and almost 2.5 years since the original application was submitted. Throughout the duration of the planning process, my client has remained cooperative with municipal staff and has been patient with their review and response times and additional requests. My client has additionally been accommodating of the comments from his neighbors and of council members and has made changes to the development plans according to their concerns, all aligned with what the technical experts have advised is considered appropriate. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Perfect. With respect to the existing designation of the property, it is designated commercial, and as such, the proposed use aligns with the municipal and county official plan, as was noted in the staff report on today's agenda. Next slide, please. As previously addressed in a letter to the adjacent property owners and spoken to at the statutory public meeting, a number of concerns were raised by neighboring property owners. I would like to reiterate again that supporting studies inclusive of an environmental impact study by a qualified biologist and a traffic impact brief prepared by a qualified transportation engineer have been prepared in support of the application. Additionally, with respect to the existing tourist commercial zone properties in the municipality, there are approximately 47, and of those properties, only 18 meet the required lot area of 4 hectares. 30 of those 47 existing tourist commercial zone properties are adjacent to shoreline residential private access zone properties. The most common form of use being a recreational trailer park, marina, and rental cottages, all of which with a greater intensity than what is being proposed by my client. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And again, these charts were included in the neighborhood letter that was sent out, and then also included to the municipality in one of the letter resubmissions. Next slide, please. In reviewing the staff report on the agenda today, municipal staff note that the use is in compliance with provincial and municipal planning policy direction, and that what is being proposed is a compatible land use. Here are excerpts from the staff report that is later on the agenda. Next slide, please. With respect to the recommendations in the staff report on today's agenda, I offer the following. With respect to item A, I would like to reiterate that the dryland boathouse is permitted as of right, and no zoning relief is required for its construction. For B, an environmental impact study was completed, and upon receiving approval of the zoning bylaw amendment, a restoration plan can be completed as a component of the site plan application to illustrate riparian and vegetation buffers and landscaping. C, as noted earlier, zoning relief is not required for the height of the rental cabins. Relief is being sought for the accessory dwelling to be 2 stories, which is consistent with the maximum height allowed in the shoreline residential private access and tourist commercial zones for the primary structures. With respect to the visual impact on the shoreline, I would like to refer council back to the circulated photographs. The adjacent properties contain 2-story dwellings, with the property to the north also having a walkout basement. The property to the northeast having 2 stories and an in-water boathouse. In addition, the proposed use is reducing the scale of development, having less visual impact from the shoreline. A vegetated buffer and plantings will be implemented through site plan approval to ensure a more naturalized shoreline. And finally, the proposed use remains residential in nature, where dwellings will be visible along the shoreline similar to the neighboring properties. Therefore, the character of the area remains the same. If council would be more comfortable, my client is agreeable to having the rental cottages being a maximum of 1.5 stories, as long as the accessory dwelling is allowed to be 2 stories. Next slide, please. Zoning relief is item D. Zoning relief is not required for the docks. The dock permits will be subject to approval from the Trent Severn Waterway. Should the municipality want the docks illustrated on the site plan for site plan approval, they can be added to the plan. Item E, zoning relief is not required for parking. Additionally, relocation of parking can be considered during the site plan process. However, the existing parking area reduces site disturbance and minimizes impact to lot drainage. And next slide, please. Oh, sorry, previous slide, please. There we go. A traffic impact brief was completed, and it determined that the proposed development that was previously 5 rental cabins will have negligible traffic impacts. And of the 47 tourist commercial zone properties in the municipality, 30 are accessed by a private road. Of these existing tourist commercial properties, the most common form of use being a recreational trailer park, marina, or rental cottages and resorts, greater than the 3 that are being proposed by my client. Next slide, please. I'd like to just again reiterate to council, in light of staff's recommendations included in the report on today's agenda, what is being required here is a change in use from shoreline residential private access to tourist commercial exception for minimum lot area, minimum setback water yards for the dwelling and septic, the accessory dwelling height and frontage on a public road. Next slide, please. In light of the aforementioned information, we respectfully request that council approve the zoning bylaw amendment. Subject to the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment, an application for site plan approval will be submitted to the municipality, whereby further requirements will be satisfied, including a restoration plan, vegetation, bufferings, landscaping that were included in the environmental impact study as recommendations. Site details with respect to parking and emergency vehicle access as well, among other items that are typical of site plan approval. I would also like to add that I recognize several other delegations with respect to this application are to follow, and I would like the council to know that I'm available to speak to any questions should you require any further clarification. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions before we go to the next delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much, and we may ask you some questions shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to item 9.3 of our agenda, which is Steve Taylor. Would you like to come up and do your delegation?
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to respond to the latest DM wills and associate document, as well as the third-party report prepared by Chris Jones. I'd like to speak to 4 issues. 1, the land use designation change. I'd like to speak about the road. I'd like to speak to the septic system. I'd like to speak to the potential legal fallout that can happen if this is approved. The most contentious issue, in my opinion, is the application to change the land use from shoreline residential to tourist commercial. Let's keep in mind, this property doesn't meet any requirements to even build a cottage on it without having some type of setbacks for the land and for the septic system. That said, to change this land use designation when the property doesn't meet those requirements isn't really considered a compromise, because the compromise isn't whether we're going to allow a building. We're changing the designation of the land, or we're not changing the designation of the land use. In Ms. Van Beek's proposal, it states that only 18 of the 47 current commercial properties meet the 4-hectare requirement. My question to that would be, how many of those 47 properties meet 0 qualifications? Because this particular proposal meets 0. It doesn't meet the water setback for the septic. It doesn't meet the setback for the building. It doesn't meet the land size setback. And any new proposal for a commercial land would also be public road access, where this is a private road. So if it's considered a new development, it meets none of the criteria. I would suggest that those other 47 properties are potentially grandfathered or legal non-conforming. And in Chris Jones's report, it states that this property doesn't meet the criteria of legal non-conforming. So I don't really think that that's a fair comparison to look at those two. The property is listed in this proposal as 0.64 hectares, but that's also including 2 islands that are non-usable land. So it's not 0.64 hectares of usable land. You've got 2 other pieces of property that are included in that size that are not usable. So we're not talking about 0.64 hectare. We're talking less than that. I would suggest it would be less than half a hectare for the property that's actually being used here. In the Chris Jones report, in the consistency of growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the GPGGH, section 4.2.4.1, there's 3 ways to designate this proposal. It's either infill, it's redevelopment, or it's resort development. If it's classified as redevelopment or resort development, it's not eligible in this plan to encroach on the 30 meter setback. And in their proposal, they're calling it redevelopment. So within the greater, within the consistency of growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, it's not eligible for the 30 meter setback. I don't see how we could possibly designate the proposal as anything but redevelopment based on that. This parcel of land, as it stands today, has never been a cottage resort. A larger portion of land that has had 3 severances made to it was a cottage resort at one time back in the late 70s or early 80s. But this piece of land as it is today was never a cottage resort. It was part of one. It was part of a greater parcel. So there was 3 severances of this property that was done in 2001. And after those severances were done, the land designation was then changed from, the land use designation was changed from commercial to shoreline residential. And that's why we have this topic that's coming up today. So now we're going to go back and change the decision made by a council, this council or previous council in 2001, to change where the property hasn't gotten any bigger. There's no other reasons to. The council made the decision to change the land use to shoreline residential because of the severances that were made to this parcel of land. So as this parcel of land sits today, it was never a cottage resort. It was a much larger piece of that. And part of that old piece of land included a lot of land on the opposite side of the peninsula. So some of the severance went to on the peninsula, which was broken off, but a lot of it was on the other side of the peninsula. And one of the most contentious issues is the road. You know, you can bring up the point that Nichols Cove is not going to be affected by, 8 more cars or 6 more cars or 12 more cars going down the road on a day. But when you get to Fire Route 94A, it goes, before it gets to the peninsula, it narrows to a spot where it's not wide enough that the Ontario Building Code will recognize that as an access for building. So that to me would be a concern. I would also suggest that it wouldn't be wide enough for emergency vehicles. We brought that up at public consultation. I was really surprised that nobody engaged emergency services in that, because this is a very, very narrow piece of road. Up until that point, it's a normal cottage road, I'd suggest. But once you get to the bridge over into the peninsula, it narrows, and that is washed out. I sent pictures early on when this process first started of how that road is washed out. It's in a low spot, and it's washed out twice since I've lived there, and it's not a road that would be used for commercial use. It's really just for to get a car across. It's not for commercial use. In Chris Jones's report, the Trent Lakes official plan section 5.6.6 states any new commercial development shall front an assumed public road. So if this is considered a new commercial development, it doesn't meet that criteria. In the recent DW Wills report, it's been noted that docking will be applied for through the Trent Severn waterway. Yet there's nothing in the planning documents referring to boat trailers or where you're going to put them. If you've got docking, those people that are going to rent those cottages are going to bring boats. And where are they going to put their trailers? I would suggest there's not enough room for car parking on that piece of property. You're never going to get enough room for trailer parking. So where would those trailers go? I would assume they're going to put them on neighboring properties because there's nowhere else to put them. So again, another big concern that hasn't been addressed. In regards to the septic system requirements for this proposal, I could not find another example where an exception was made for a 30-meter setback to a septic system on a new commercial development. And I would challenge I would challenge the council or any of the planners to find an example where we've given a 30-meter setback on septic on a commercial build. I don't think there's any examples of that. In a peer review report, it stated that the septic system would need to operate optimally at all times. The sewage flow was estimated at 8,500 liters a day, and concerns in that report were raised that it could exceed 10,000 liters a day. In the report back on the peer review, it was noted that the owner would self-monitor. My call out would be to approve something that need to function at full optimum to be safe. And then the only real, fallback on that would be self-monitor, would not be something I think that we would be comfortable with. In speaking with some of my neighbors, they mentioned that before they purchased their properties, their lawyers had consultation to find out what the designation was of this empty vacant piece of land and what could be done with it. And they were notified that it was designated as residential, shoreline residential, and would not have the criteria to meet a development. So our concerns there really is allowing a commercial development next door would affect the value of their properties, and feel that they may have legal recourse if the land designation was changed without meeting the appropriate criteria. I feel this would put the municipality at undue risk. The neighbors that had engaged with me had talked about, what are the next steps if this does approve? Are we going to go to Ontario, the land tribunal or whatever? So I don't know from a council standpoint if you can give us direction on what those steps would be if we were to take those next steps.
Thank you. I'm sure staff have all the steps that you would need to take this to a different venue, but does anyone have any questions? Are you finished or?
Thank you.
Anyone have any questions, Mr. Taylor? Seeing none. Okay, I thank you very much for your presentation. Look forward to speaking later. Okay, we can move on to we will probably receive all of these delegations at one motion at the end. We can move on to Bill Jackson. Please come up and do your presentation. Thank you. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Council. I have prepared remarks, and as a result, Steve and I are going to wind up talking about a few of the same things, and I apologize, but I think it's because they are important things. My name is Bill Jackson. My wife, Fiona McComb, and I are the owners of the property next to the one in question. And I addressed council in May, and I'm not going to go over all that same territory again, but you already are aware that I am opposed to this rezoning. One of the things that I will reiterate, however, is that whatever decision might be made to change this to a commercial zoning is permanent. And any future owners beyond Mr. Lennox won't necessarily feel bound to any promises or assurance that he has made. Since May, there has been a revised proposal from Wills Associates on behalf of Mr. Lennox, as well as a memo from Chris Jones advising council on the proposal. And most of my remarks today will address these, as well as Chris Jones' memo from May 8th of 2020. I'll start towards the end of the Wills response dated June 12th, 2023, where in response to our suggestion that this proposal sets a bad precedent, Wills and Associates state, in land use planning, there is no precedent set. Now, first of all, I strongly disagree with them. I think precedent is critical to any public discussion. This is what keeps the process predictable and transparent and fair. Secondly, in the same report, but 5 pages earlier, Wills and Associates start talking about 47 tourist commercial properties in Trent Lakes, which presumably is talking about precedent. I mean, it's kind of a bold move to cite precedent and later on say that precedent doesn't count. But I would argue that those precedents do count. And so again, as Steve mentioned a few minutes ago, the first thing I would want to know is how many of those are commercial operations that predate the existing bylaws. Because if we're going to cite as precedent a very old building, a very old lot, a very old operation, well, then there might as well not be zoning bylaws, because no matter what someone might want to do, they can find some old building somewhere that breaks those rules. So if they're older operations, we might as well not really be talking about them in this context. On the other hand, if they are more recent, then again, I would want to know, did they require multiple exemptions from the standards, as Mr. Lennox does? Do any of them require as drastic an exemption as an 84% reduction in the 4 hectare standard, or a 73% reduction in one case of the 30-meter setback from the shoreline? So in other words, I'm sort of asking, are these really precedents, or were they just distractions put into that document? I'd like to turn my attention to the memos from Chris Jones. Again, one was in May 2020 in regard to the official Peterborough County plan. And at that time, Jones wrote, the commercial designation does not have any basis or logic given the current land use and size of the parcel. And later in the same memo, given the size of the parcel, it is difficult to reconcile that any commercial redevelopment would be compliant with provincial, county, or municipal planning policies which require a 30-meter shoreline setback. So first of all, I'll draw your attention to the fact that there are serious concerns raised by Chris Jones in 2020 about the lot size and the 30-meter setback, and also the use of the term redevelopment, which Steve Taylor mentioned a few minutes ago. So now we move ahead to the Chris Jones report of August 29th, and the 30-meter setback comes up again. On page 10, point number 3 in the memo, it states that the lot is eligible for relief from the 30-meter shoreline setback requirement under the county plan. But I will pause here just to observe that eligible is not the same as entitled to. And just anecdotally, I know of 3 homeowners who have had projects rejected based on that 30-meter setback. And all of them were only asking for a few feet of relief, not relief up to 21 meters, which is one of the instances in this current proposal in front of us. The next 2 pages in this more recent Chris Jones report do address the Golden Horseshoe Plan, and again, Steve alluded to that a few minutes ago. And this is where the word redevelopment once again becomes important. It's explained very helpfully in that document that redevelopment strictly requires a 30-meter setback. On the other hand, an infill project has a little bit more wiggle room. And then Jones acknowledges that redevelopment is a possible interpretation of this proposal, but then settles on calling it infill, I would argue, without much justification beyond mentioning a lack of density and amenities. And I have some problems with this interpretation of this being infill. First of all, it doesn't really align with the general idea of infill, which is adding structures within existing structures, because that's not what's happening here. What's proposed here is we're going to tear everything down and rebuild it from the ground up, and that's redevelopment. And again, Chris Jones called it redevelopment in 2020, and Wills and Associates themselves refer to it as redevelopment 7 times in their most recent document. The word infill is never mentioned by any of them, except right here. And so, you know, why is Chris Jones suddenly calling this infill? And it almost feels as if this was a case where someone was trying to get to a particular conclusion, but knew there was a roadblock and needed a way to stick handle around it. Because other than that, using the word infill in this context doesn't really seem to make any sense. And really, if anything, we should be erring in the other direction. We should err in the side of holding new developments to the highest reasonable standards when it comes to things like shoreline protection. Excuse me. The other issue raised in that 2020 memo is lot size. Again, Mr. Lennox is asking for the 4-hectare standard to be reduced by 84%. And that's even counting those islands and being a little bit generous in that case. Inexplicably, the Chris Jones memo of August 29th barely addresses this. On page 14, Jones walks through a kind of imaginary scenario involving a 4-hectare commercial property and eventually lands on this equally imaginary bylaw standard of 8 cabins per hectare. I mean, that's not a thing. It just suddenly shows up in this document that suddenly the standard we're going to use is 8 cabins per hectare. But again, otherwise, the whole 4-hectare, the biggest ask that Mr. Lennox is making is not mentioned again in the 19-page document. So why? Well, once again, it seems that Jones doesn't want to be the one responsible, doesn't want to have the buck stop here. It's really the only explanation I can come up with for ignoring such a significant exemption that's being asked for. And I think that's a disservice to all of us, that this report tries to sort of tap dance around such an obvious problem with this rezoning request. And it's particularly disappointing when it was the same Chris Jones that was the one to raise the issue in 2020. So on the 2 biggest exemptions that Mr. Lennox is asking for, the lot size and the setback, the Jones memo all but ignores the first and gives a very dubious response on the second. So I would ask that council would make a more thoughtful decision and have a more thoughtful look at those 2 things than what happened in that response. As I mentioned in May, residents in this neighborhood have a reasonable expectation that anything that becomes of this property would conform to the obvious facts on the ground. It is a residential size lot and it is zoned shoreline residential. So really what I'm asking for is that we simply enforce the rules as they are and we leave it as it is and develop it if necessary or if desired, subject to it being a residential property. One other thing that is of concern to me is considering again, sort of down the road in the future, what is the end game of this property? Should it be turned commercial? And I noticed just learning this today that Mr. Lennox is not interested in reducing the size of the cabins, the buildings to 1 story. So why? There's something here that if it's really going to fit all the rules, there is perhaps a problem with return on investment. And so where does that lead? Mr. Lennox himself, or again, possibly some future owner, will look at that 4-bedroom accessory dwelling and probably not be able to resist potentially $4,000 or $5,000 a week in rental income. Or perhaps there will be some attempt made in the future to turn it into a timeshare or condo operation or something like that. Once that commercial zoning genie is out of the bottle, there's really no way to put it back. And if a lot of things change down the road, I highly doubt that we're all going to reconvene and say, oh, that wasn't what we promised, or that wasn't what we were promised, so we're going to change this back to residential.
Just want to remind you, your 10 minutes is pretty much up. Can you kind of wrap it up a bit?
I'm finished, as a matter of fact. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Very, very good. Thank you very much, Bill. Anyone have any questions, Bill? I'm seeing none. Thank you very much for your delegation. We can move on now to item 9.5 of our agenda, which is Peter Cox, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I will be very brief because the previous two speakers have covered most of my points. I thank Mary Webb for her presentation. I think it was very timely because I think it's incumbent on all of us in this room to look at what we have and to look at the future and our children. And as the mayor quite rightly said, it's up to us to protect the lakes that we live on. And I will leave it at that. The rest of my points have been made already.
Thank you very much, Peter. Does anyone have any questions, Peter? Seeing none, thank you very much, Peter. Okay, we can move on to Brian Aitken. Who would like to take the chair?
Thank you.
Of your delegation.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Much like Mr. Cox, I have kind of same concerns that have already been voiced by Bill and Steve. I just was unable to attend the public meeting back in May, so I just wanted to appear and voice my objections and concerns as well. Just a couple of key items to reinforce the size of the property and the land use being restated to commercial is very concerning to me. I personally think that if it's a commercial resort, I know that you couldn't have enough rentals around here a couple of years ago during the pandemic with travel restrictions. People were traveling locally. As that falls off, we're seeing more less activity. People are more back to traveling globally and stuff like that and doing other things. When you have to market something and you're promoting a commercial resort, I think the perception of someone coming to stay at a commercial resort is different than somebody who might come to, say, an Airbnb, where you're coming into someone's family cottage. It's, you know, decorated, it's someone's family's place, and you're more respectful of it. I think people coming to a commercial property are more like they're going to a hotel. It's just, I'm paying to be here. This place takes care of itself, and they're less concerned. One of the concerning items to me is that the septic is residing on top of a rock. If there's any problems with that septic, there's septic going into the lake. People coming from the city are probably less likely, it's stated that it has to run optimally to be effective, and Mr. Lennox is personally committed to observe it and maintain it himself. Anything Mr. Lennox is personally committed to, I don't see that it can be used as substantiation against any considerations or, you know, concessions that are made, because if he sells the property the day after it's built, that next person is, as Bill had stated, not going to be potentially as concerned. People coming from the city to a commercial resort, I believe, are more likely to make mistakes and flush things that aren't supposed to be flushed, you know, sanitary napkins, whatever else. And if it has to run optimally and one mistake like that is made, we're going to have septic in the lake, which is extremely concerning. The size concerns, you know, I understand that a portion of the properties in the area that are zoned for commercial use, their land use is deemed commercial. How many of them are under 15% of the criteria? I know that's been stated by other people today already, but for me, I've continued every time I come to pay my taxes here. I ask this, I go to the other side of the room and ask what the status of this application is. I've been surprised that it's made it as far as it has, given the extreme considerations or concessions that would have to be made to allow it to go forward. So I don't have much else to say. I just wanted to kind of emphasize some key concerns that I have and be here to another person making similar objections and having similar concerns.
Thank you very much, Brian. Does any members of council have a question, Brian? I am seeing none. Thank you very much for your delegation. We can move on to item 9.7 of our agenda, which is Jeff Sutherland and Susan Langell. Please.
They are online. I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, just want to say that our views align with the previous delegates that have spoken, and we stand behind all their comments. And I appreciate you guys taking the time to have a meeting with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff and Susan. We appreciate your comments. Okay, that is our last delegation. Anyone have any questions or comments? Catherine, did you want to speak to any of those concerns or?
If council would allow me
I
just a
think
moment.
we can, it's part of the original delegations. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you again. Definitely understand the concerns raised by the adjacent landowners, but I think I did just want to reiterate the process behind site plan approval. Site plan approval is registered on title and through site plan agreements and whatnot. The landowner has to abide by the certain conditions, and it's a legal agreement, and it's bound by title. So with respect to concerns about septic and whatnot, even though Peterborough Public Health has approved the plan, a hydrogeological study was completed, and in the support of that, I just wanted to reiterate essentially the purpose of site plan approval, and that's where essentially different conditions, especially with respect to recommendations in the environmental impact study and whatnot, those are built into legal conditions and a site plan agreement, which is registered on title. So it doesn't end with the existing property owner. But that's all I have to speak to right now. Thank you very much.
Any members of council have questions? I'm seeing none. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for your delegation. I would entertain a motion. Anyone? Go ahead, Councillor Brandon.
A motion to receive all delegations.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? I see Councillor Braybrook for a seconder. Any other conversation? I'm seeing none. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you, everyone, for your delegation. Okay, we can move on to item 10 of our agenda, which is staff reports. Public Works, we have none. Parks and Recreation Facilities, we have none. Fire and Emergency Services, we have none. We can move on to item 10.4 of our agenda, which is Building and Planning. We can move on to 10.4.1. And Sarah Delamarter, our Junior Planner, would you like to speak to this file?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. On today's agenda, we have a supplementary report associated with file number 22-19, Ventresca. On September 6th, 2022, Council held a public meeting for the application to consider a zoning bylaw amendment for the shoreline lot located at 61 Saunders Road on Big Bald Lake. The application has been the subject of the following prior memos to Council: August 25th, 2022, November 25th, 2022, December 9th, 2022, and January 17th, 2023, all prepared by the external planning consultant, Chris Jones. The purpose of the revised memo attached to today's agenda is to advise Council that the applicant has submitted a revised site plan, which the Planning Department is prepared to support. To this end, a zoning bylaw amendment is included on today's agenda and is recommended for approval. In addition, a site plan agreement has also been prepared and will be executed by the applicant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone here? I guess we won't speak for it. This is called for public. Any conversation from council? I am seeing none. We can move on to item 10. Okay, can we have a motion for that? Anyone prepared to make a motion? Seeing none. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mayor Lamson. I will make a motion to receive the report and to direct the manager of planning and building to enter into a site plan agreement and to approve the attached zoning bylaw agreement.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Armstrong, do I have a seconder for that motion? Seeing Councillor Braybrook for a second, or any other conversation? I'm seeing none. Just a comment of my own. The site plan agreement is the spot to catch anything that is very important for our shorelines and things. This will be caught. Okay, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. Okay, we can move on to item 10.4.2 of our agenda. And I do believe Chris Jones, our Municipal Planning Services planner, would like to speak to this file. Are you there, Chris?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Okay. So you have in your agenda my planning report, and what I've done is just in the interest of sort of efficiency, is I have just prepared a PowerPoint with some speaking points. Yeah, that's it. So if it's Bianca or Jesse that has that, we'll just move through this and try to touch on the salient points of my planning report. And then really, there is while I am providing a recommendation in support of the application, it is obviously subject to some other measures and contingencies, but there is no bylaw, no instrument on the agenda today for council's consideration. So ultimately, where we go out of this after comments, questions, and deliberation is basically direction back to the planning department on where you want to go from here. So again, the short backdrop, I'll try to move along here because again, this has been obviously a topical application so far today. But the request, of course, is to rezone part of Lot 16, Concession 13 from the SRPA zone to a tourist commercial exception. And that tourist commercial exception would essentially provide relief from the minimum lot area requirement, water yard requirements, and as well as the requirement for access to a public road for commercial use. And the applicant has also added the provision for height of an accessory building. And so let's just go to the next slide then. And what we have here, of course, is the current proposal before council. I believe this is the second revision from the original submission. And the salient point here being that the number of cottages or rental cottages has been reduced from 5 to 3, as well as a reduction in the floor area of those rental cottages by 100 square feet. The original sort of storage boathouse structure and the owner or manager's residence has essentially stayed the same. And on that site plan, again, as we have seen, I think since the outset or complete application, you can see sort of the watermark illustrations of the original cabins. If we go to the next slide. This is just a few, I'm not sure if members of council have had an opportunity to see the site. I've been out a couple of times. Obviously, the historic use is, according to information that's been provided by the applicant, goes back to the 1960s anyway, when these structures were in existence as some form of tourist establishment or fishing resort. And those buildings in, again, various states of repair obviously still exist in present day. Next slide. Just another, again, a little bit of history or backdrop on the evolution of the property. Again, all we know is that the commercial nature of the use was established a long time ago. And it also ceased operation a substantial number of years ago. But in terms of planning approvals, the 2001 severance applications, and there was 3. And what you're looking at is the sketch. The entirety of that property is delineated in red, and then references to some interior lot lines through parts 1, 2, and 3 are shown. And what those represent are consent applications or severance applications that were approved in 201, with parts 2 and 3 being lot additions to abutting lots, and part 1 being the creation of a new lot for a dwelling. It was at that time in 2001 when the lands were rezoned from the commercial zone to a rural residential exception zone. And next slide. So again, important, I think, in the consideration and trying to move through this application is, again, trying to have some appreciation or understanding for what has historically not only existed as a land use, but how the municipality's planning documents affected or acknowledged this particular piece of land. And as council is aware, under the Planning Act, we have two primary public documents that are set out for the purpose of regulating land use and managing and directing land use. First one being the official plan, and the second one being the zoning bylaw. And when we look at the official plan, what we understand is that these lands have remained in a commercial designation since at least 1990. So that's essentially 3 official plans ago. Township of Harvey official plan had these lands identified or designated in a commercial manner. The predecessor official plan to the current official plan had it designated commercial, and then of course our current official plan has the lands designated commercial. And on the issue of zoning, and zoning is generally intended to implement the land use of the official plan, because the official plan is not necessarily a legal document. The way it was taught to me in planning school is that municipalities or councils are bound by their official plan, and zoning bylaws are bound on the landowner. And so these lands, again, were certainly zoned commercial up until the time of those consent applications, at which time there was a rezoning for all of those parts to take them from commercial to rural residential. Next slide. So again, the chronology, this has been a winding road, but starting in the spring or early summer of 2020, and that was the initial pre-consultation and review of the basically the existing nature of land use and essentially options through the form of pre-consultation comments to the applicant, and you know, one option being seeing this lot move forward on the basis of a shoreline residential dwelling lot as contemplated by the SRPA zone, which was in existence. The other being the option of essentially following through on the existing official plan designation being commercial. And so the comments, the pre-consultation comments, and the path that this application ultimately took was one of the applicant seeking to, again, leverage or implement the official plan designation that is in place and has been in place for some time. Again, the complete application, the peer reviews, supplemental submission. There was a public meeting earlier this year, followed by, again, a supplemental submission, which the applicant has spoken to. Next slide. Again, that the technical work that has been submitted on this application is fairly all-encompassing. It has been the subject of peer review comments, and there has been resubmissions of essentially all of these studies with the intention of addressing peer review comments. And for the most part, for the scale of the proposal, I found the nature of the submissions to be certainly appropriate and reasonable. And we'll just move to the next slide. So what I've set out for council is again my consideration of policies that we are again bound by, and as we consider applications like this, as well as issues that have been raised. And so starting with conformity with the Trent Lakes official plan, and again, this is a significant point, I think, as a stepping off point in terms of where you go with other considerations and issues. But the fact that the lands have been designated in a commercial manner, and I'll certainly, sorry, his name escapes me at the moment, but reference to my pre-consultation letter, that essentially my understanding that these lands were designated for commercial was befuddling. That the land use had long ago, or apparently long ago, ceased, and yet that designation remained. Again, but whether or not I personally agree with how certain lands are designated, I am nonetheless sort of bound by those designations. And in this case, again, that commercial designation becomes a fairly significant stepping off point in reviewing other policy matters and technical issues. The comment about, and again, sorry, I don't have all the names memorized here, but the reference to a new commercial use requiring public access, and that is certainly not lost on me. But the consideration here being that this is an existing commercial designation. And so it's an existing commercial designation which has frontage on a private road. So it's I would suggest that the applicability of that particular policy would not weigh large here. In fact, what we're dealing with again is an existing commercial designation and a proposal to essentially move forward with a new commercial proposal. Conformity with the Peterborough official plan, I do recognize that there is a draft official plan out there. It is not approved, and because it's not approved, it is not a document that really significant weight can be utilized or relied upon. And so again, you'll see in my consideration of the county official plan and the shorelines and waterfront area designation that commercial uses like this are contemplated by the Peterborough official plan. The next Planning Act requirement for council is that proposals must be, quote, consistent with the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And it's on this point where, again, it was indicated earlier, it's on this point that section 4245, which speaks very clearly to shoreline areas designated or zoned as of, I believe it's 2017. And there are very specific policies that flow from that. And then these very specific sort of descriptions of types of land uses, that being infilling, redevelopment, and resort development. And so reconciling those uses, because again, as I indicated in my report, infill development has a lower bar to jump over insofar as respecting a minimum 30-meter setback from the shoreline. Infill development is given some latitude to encroach into that shoreline or water yard, whereas the language surrounding, or the policy language surrounding resort development and redevelopment are sort of beholden to a minimum 30-meter setback. And so again, this became I think it's a well-intended section. It was from the outset when I working in a lot of lake-based municipalities, I sort of liked the fact that there was some specific provincial policy dealing with existing shoreline areas designated or zoned, and then some specific policy really aimed at sort of restoration and protection of shoreline and littoral habitats. But again, where I ultimately ended up here, and there, as council is aware, there was an OLT hearing that we had not long ago, which spent the better part of 3 or 4 days really scrutinizing that particular section 4245. What is infill? What is redevelopment? What is resort development? All generally in the absence of very specific definitions, which in the planning world we interpret and employ policy or regulation usually on the strength of clear definitions. But in this case, we do not have a definition of resort development. We do not have a definition of infill. And then redevelopment, we do have a provincial definition, but it's a definition that isn't necessarily what's being proposed here, i.e. the creation of new lots or a change in land use. So Yeah, it's reconciling that particular section was a challenge, but ultimately where I ended up here really came to a consideration of, again, the scale of the proposal. And I was of the view that while I acknowledge the lot is not, it certainly doesn't comply with minimum standards, although as the applicant's planner has noted, not many of our lots, commercial lots, comply with minimum standards as far as area goes. So, but considering again the scale, and land use planning and regulation is a lot about scale and density. And so that's ultimately where I sort of looked at this proposal and found that, or concluded that it was appropriate to be aligned, or certainly not inappropriate to be aligned with infill development, which again, the primary test coming out of that, or policy criteria, would be the requirement to enhance or restore the shoreline. Next, I spent some time in the report again talking about historic use and legal nonconformity, and again, it's I don't think there's any question amongst sort of the applicant or municipality that this use has been clearly discontinued, and therefore does not meet the Planning Act test nor our own zoning bylaws test for being a legal nonconforming use. But nonetheless, I sort of went through the forensics and dates, and at times where I had that information available, and set it out so that council could be informed on this particular issue. And I also concluded this particular part of my report with, I believe it was a summary of what we refer to as the Ottawa decision, and that was a decision that went to the Ontario Municipal Board and to divisional court a little over 10 years ago, that really had the effect of sort of rewriting some of the rules as they relate to legal nonconformity. I think the major takeaway there on the issue of legal nonconformity is you make your best informed consideration and come to a determination as to what you think you have, but understand that that consideration is always a step away from putting it in front of either the municipal board or land tribunal or a court of law. Size and scale of the development, I've already referred to that. That was again a consideration here that I did feel that while we are talking about 4 habitable buildings, I think the technical information has certainly flushed out that these buildings can be technically accommodated on the lot, and again, I'm of the view that the cleanup of the lot, and if some other provisions or stipulations can be put in place in the form of restoration or leaving that eastern shoreline alone, which I don't think the eastern shoreline ever really has been the subject of development, that I think there's an opportunity for some benefit that would come from the development. Traffic and road usage, again, I've been on site a couple of times. Access comes from Nichols Cove Road to Fire Route 94 to 94A. And yeah, they are private roads. I fully agree. The character and nature of those roads is certainly not unlike many of the private roads that I've experienced in the municipality and other municipalities. And my consideration here is whether some other level of assessment or consideration can be taken that would see, in the event council chose to support the application, could any steps be taken with those private roads, knowing that it's private property, but could any steps be taken by the landowner in the way of maintenance or safety to help the long-term condition of those roads. Last but not least, I recognize there was concerns with respect to rental properties and nuisance, and I I certainly hear those concerns loud and clear. And at the same time, it's, we are guided by, at least the planning department is guided by policies and a land use designation, which indicates and has indicated for a long time that these lands are in a commercial designation. And so issues with respect to nuisance or problem renters are concerns which I think the municipality has some responsibility to address. In this case, again, an owner operator would equally have responsibility to deal with those types of concerns and impacts. And so where's my next slide then? So where I ended up with this, Mr. Mayor and Council, is that I'm of the view that the application on balance conforms with the Trent Lakes and Peterborough County official plans, that the application conforms or is consistent with the growth plan, and that the technical basis that's been provided is reasonable and appropriate for the use. I have set out some recommended measures or stipulations that could be things addressed through the zoning bylaw amendment and/or a site plan agreement. And those things relate to shoreline naturalization, restoration, restricting the size of the rental cottages, the septic servicing information that accompanied this submission indicated that those buildings would be 2-bedroom cottages. And so a floor area stipulation which would try to provide some assurance that that's what they end up being, I don't think is unreasonable. Thirdly, additional consideration or detail for parking, whether there's another place for the storage or boathouse building to go, as well as docking locations. I'm not sure what's intended here, if it's a communal central dock or individual docks. And lastly, as I already indicated, I would certainly encourage assessment of the private roads for potential safety or maintenance. And that's my overview, Mr. Mayor and Council, and I'll turn it back to you. And certainly, if there's any questions or comments, then ask away.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Does any member of council have a question or a comment? Go ahead, Councillor Braber.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Thanks very much, Mr. Jones, for your report, and thank you to the people who spoke on behalf of this agenda item. In reviewing this item, I came up with 3 observations, and at the end of those observations, I have questions. But after listening to your presentation, Mr. Jones, I might have to skip the question 2 and 3, and then I'll go to 1 after that. So bear with me. So with respect to your August 29th report, and what I'll say before is I share observations that Mr. Jackson and Mr. Taylor had presented. So with respect to your report, it references the growth plan consistency and whether the proposal is characterized as an infill development, redevelopment, or development. You state that the GPGGH does not define infill development, however, it does provide definitions for development and redevelopment. Appreciating the fact you make mention that the proposal could fit into any of the 3 categories, you took the position that the proposal, in your opinion, fits into the category of infill development, and as such would permit the proposal to encroach into the minimum 30-meter setback. Now, I was going to ask a question there, but I think you answered it. My question was going to be, how did you establish that the proposal was an infill? And what I gathered from your response was that it was a lower ball threshold as opposed to the definitions of the development and redevelopment. So I'll move on to observation 2 and question 2. You also state in your report that the GPGGH defines development in part as the creation of a new lot, a change in land use, or the construction of buildings and structures requiring approval under the Planning Act. So my question is, would a zoning bylaw amendment constitute a change in land use? Does the proposed building of 4 structures constitute building of structures and buildings? that require approval under the Planning Act? If it does it trigger the minimum 30-meter setback, as you mentioned in your comment, that if the proposal is considered a redevelopment or development, it is not attainable on the subject lands? I'll let you answer that first, and then I have my third and final question.
So, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Braybrook. So the definition of redevelopment from the growth plan, and as I indicated in my overview, it's apart from sort of bit definitions or one word definitions that you got to put together with another word like infill or resort, redevelopment, we do have the benefit of a provincial definition. And as you indicated, that means the creation of new units, uses, or lots on previously developed land in existing communities, including brownfield sites. So the part of your question, if this is redevelopment, is it subject to a minimum 30-meter setback? And yes, my interpretation of the growth plan is the 30-meter setback is not negotiable or does not have any latitude. The reason why I considered infill development as sort of the more appropriate fit in this case is, this definition, it goes back a few years, and it's making references to new units and lots firstly. And units would be a reference to a plan of condominium. Lots, of course, would be a reference to a plan of subdivision or severances. Sandwiched in between those two terms, units and lots, is the reference to the creation of new quote uses. And so again, we're in a situation where the historic use of this property has been commercial for rental cabins. That use has been discontinued, and yet the designation, the official plan designation remains and has remained to present day, and it was also zoned that way up until 2001. So the second part of that definition, on previously developed land in existing communities, including brownfield sites. Has the land previously been developed? Yes. Is it in an existing community? It's in a shoreline community. I think I still am of the view that the context for that particular definition likely speaks to urban areas and built up areas. And lastly, the last reference to that is a brownfield site, which is certainly this site in its current state would probably fit the definition of brownfield. Well, the more typical reference to a brownfield would be former industrial uses. But the fact that the buildings sit there in a derelict state and something has to happen to allow them to move forward, it's not beyond the realm of being brownfield. So yeah, the short answer is if it's redevelopment, if that's where council ends up, then the 30 meters would apply. And the applicant is not in a position to achieve that. So the application, if council is of the view this is redevelopment or resort development, then that item would be fatal as far as consistency with the growth plan.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Did you have one more question, Councilor Braber?
No, I think Mr. Jones answered it.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Armstrong.
Are we okay for comments?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lemstead. While I applaud Mr. Lennox's initiative in trying to expand our commercial accommodations, because it takes energy and drive and so forth, this is the wrong lot. I mean, it's just, if I strip away everything else, what this still represents is developing a commercial operation on a property that's 0.65 hectares when a requirement of 4 hectares is there. It's kind of as simple as that. And it's not so much that I'm adhering to the bylaw requirement for the sake of that, but it's there for a reason. And that is because of the environmental pressure it puts on our lake. And our stewardship role as council is very important, as we heard from the previous presentation. And, you know, while I think the idea is great, this is just the wrong location for it. I do think it's redevelopment. Because clearly we're doing something entirely different. The last use of it has lapsed for decades, and it's been rezoned in the interim. I don't think we can look at this application from the view of history. I think we need to look at it based on today's landscape, today's understanding of environmental responsibility, and, you know, the future. So I'm inclined not to support this. I'm sorry it's gotten so far along, but I just think it's an inappropriate zoning and usage of this property.
Thank you for your comments. Does anyone else have any comments? I will put one comment forward that when I look at the lake shoreline on the property as it exists today, it disturbs me that that could continue for the foreseeable future. I think this is a fairly small development. I know it's a small lot. I know that we're asking a lot, but we have an opportunity here to protect and preserve the shorelines of this lot. Otherwise, we don't have an opportunity unless we let some sort of development happen. I think the site planning, I mean, there's some whole bunch of technical studies that are far beyond me to say yes or no to, that support this sort of development on this lot. And we have an opportunity to save the shoreline. And that's what, for me, is the most important part, where I can find my way to supporting something like this. It's substantial. I'm not saying it's not. It's going to affect your neighborhood, but it's just the shoreline is what we need to save. And I think this would be our opportunity. And that's my comment. Anyone else have any other comments? I'm seeing none. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Councillor Francis.
Very much for the same reason that Deputy Mayor Armstrong stated, I certainly can't support this application. I think that it changes the nature of the neighborhood. I think it puts a large impact on the lake, and I think it puts a large impact on the road.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mayor. First, this owner or any other owner can protect the shoreline. It doesn't have to be through putting commercial development there. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here. So I'd like a motion to receive the report and to decline the application.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second that motion.
And I'd like a recorded vote.
Any other conversation? Our clerk will call for the vote.
Deputy Mayor Armstrong, are you in favor?
No. I'm sorry, yes.
The motion, yes, sorry.
Yes, sorry. Get my lines and accepts reversed.
Councillor Braybrooke,
Yes.
Councillor Cadigan,
I am.
Councillor Franzen,
Yes.
Mayor Lambshead.
I am in the only nay vote.
That motion is carried.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we can move on in our agenda to 10.5, which is finance, which we have done. We can move on to 10.6, which is administration, and we can go to 10.6.1. Chastity Robertson, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lambshead, the health and safety policy is reviewed annually and was recently reviewed by SHRP, the Joint Health and Safety Committee, and the municipalities department heads. Changes to the policy are minor and were generally made to the wording for clarity of processes. And I am recommending that council receive the health and safety policy report from the deputy treasurer and that council approve the amended health and safety policy attached.
Okay, thank you very much, Chastity. Does anyone have any questions of Chastity? I'm seeing none. Is anyone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Franzen?
I'd be prepared to make a motion to support the amendments to the health and safety policy.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? See Councillor Cadigan for a second. Any conversation? I just have one comment. Thank you very much for highlighting all the changes in red. Makes it much easier to understand the changes that were made. Appreciate that. Thank you very kindly. Okay. No other comments? I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. We will move on to item 10.7, which is corporate services. We can go to 10.7.1, which is Bianca Jajkicevic, our deputy clerk. Would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, and through you. Before you are the council expenses received for the month of July and the remainder of June for council's approval and authorization. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bianca. Is anyone prepared to make a motion? I see Councillor Cadigan.
I'll make a motion to approve the expenses.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Braybrook for a seconder. Any conversation? I'm seeing none. I will call for the vote. All in favor? Right, that motion has carried. Okay, we can move on now to item 10.7.2 of our agenda, which is Jessie Clark, our Director of Corporate Services Clerk. Would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lamstead, at the February 7th council meeting, council approved the stop-up, closure, and sale of a portion of an unopened road allowance to Linda and Raymond Daly and Susan and Peter Dance. The applicants have completed an appraisal, and the total appraised value of the land is $7,300, which will be split evenly amongst the applicants. And the land will serve as a lot addition and merge with both of the applicants' lots. Staff are recommending that council receive the report, authorize the transfer of parts 1 and 2 on Plan 45R 17522, approve the purchase price of $7,300, and that council authorize the mayor and clerk to execute any necessary documents.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone have any questions or comments? I'm seeing none. Is anyone prepared to make a motion? See Deputy Mayor Armstrong, go ahead.
Yes, I received the report, authorized the transfer of the portion of the open road allowance, and approve the purchase price, and authorize the mayor and clerk to execute the associated documents.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Cadigan for a seconder. Any other conversation? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. Okay, now we can move on to item 11 of our agenda, which is correspondence for information. We can receive them all at one motion, or we can talk about anyone we want, whatever council decides. Go ahead, Councillor Braber.
Excuse me, make a motion to receive all.
We have a motion to receive them all. Do I have a seconder for that motion? The Deputy Mayor Armstrong for a seconder. Any conversation? None. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. If we can move on to item 12 of our agenda, which is correspondence for action. We can move on to item 12.1, which is the Peterborough and Kawartha Chamber of Commerce. Anyone like to talk about it, speak about it? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Armstrong.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lamstead. I'd like a motion to support the sponsorship request for $500, as it's a repeat of last year, and I believe there's money in the budget to cover that.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? I see Councillor Braybrook. Any other questions, comments? I might throw a little question to our CAO treasurer. I'm sure we have money somewhere that we can take from for that.
Thank you, and through you. The council advertising budget does have just over 1,500 left for spending.
Thank you very much, Donna. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. Okay, we can move on. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Braber.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I'll let you continue.
Item 12.2 of the agenda, which is black ash tree endangered species classification. Go ahead,
Motion to receive.
Motion to receive. Do I have a seconder for that motion? I see Councillor Cadigan for a seconder. Any other conversation? I'm seeing none. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. Okay, we can move on to item 12.3 of the agenda. Anyone like to go ahead, Councillor Franzen?
I'd like to support the climate energy transition transfers. I think there's more that we have to do in climate change.
Okay,
I support most of what they've said.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? I'm seeing Councillor Cadigan for a seconder. Any other conversation? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. Okay, we can move on to bylaws on the agenda. We can go to item 13.1, the item memorandum. Jesse Clark, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lambshead, there were 3 bylaws on today's agenda that didn't have a corresponding staff report or were part of a public meeting. The first is the 2023-71, which is to authorize the execution of shoreline road allowance agreements for Series 37. The 2023-73 is a bylaw to authorize the acquisition of land for the purpose of a public highway as a condition of consent for B 125 and 126-21. And B 2023-75 is a bylaw to authorize borrowing for the new dedicated mechanics facility.
Okay, thank you very much for the update. We can move on to item 13.2. We could possibly do all these in one motion if everyone is inclined. If not, we can go one at a time. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
I'll make a motion to support or approve all of them.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cadigan for a seconder. Any other conversation? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. Thank you very much. We can move on to item 14 of our agenda, which is business arising out of a previous meeting. Does anyone have any business arising out of a previous meeting they would like to discuss? Seeing none, I would like to just, maybe it wasn't a meeting, but the Kinmount Fair was a resounding success. And thank you very much for any members of council that made it up there. And thank you very much to Deputy Mayor Armstrong for attending the ceremony. Okay, we can move on now to item 15 of our agenda, which is notices of motion. We can go to 15.1. Councillor Braber, would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mayor, at our August 8th, 2023 council meeting, we received a presentation from Bruce Averill on behalf of the Lakehurst Hall Board in regards to the proposed development of the lower bowl at Lakehurst Hall. Staff had identified the existing Lakehurst Trail as an easy starting point for the Open Spaces Master Plan trail development. This existing trail system also connects to the proposed development of the Lakehurst Hall lower bowl. Council supported the concept and provided comments in support and added that there would have to be drawings completed along with the costing for the project prior to any work or clearing commencing on the lower bowl. On December 5th, 2022, Council approved a $10,000 request made by staff to be used in the 2023 timeframe for architectural or engineering drawings as a pre-planning measure for any municipal projects. To date, no monies have been spent. As previously stated, staff have identified the existing Lakehurst Hall trail system as a viable starting point for the Open Spaces Master Plan trail development, and of which the proposed Lakehurst Hall lower bowl connects to. On August 21st, 2023, I met with our CAO and staff to discuss the development of the Lakehurst trail system in conjunction with the development of the Lakehurst Hall lower bowl. Conversation included the fact that the Lakehurst Hall property is municipally owned and any improvements to the hall are coordinated by staff, and it would be commonsensical for the municipality to control and coordinate the proposed improvement to the Lakehurst Hall lower bowl as part and parcel to the development rejuvenation of the existing Lakehurst trail system, which would include obtaining drawings utilizing available funds from the 2023 $10,000 allotment for drawing for municipal projects. Staff are in agreement with the concept of taking carriage of the proposed lower bowl development, and as such, I would like to make a motion. Do I just,
I think
launch right into it?
I think you can go right ahead and start your motion this time.
All right. Okay, my motion is whereas the Open Spaces Master Plan report was approved on March 21st, 2023, which in part identified the Lakehurst Hall Trail as a viable trail, and whereas Trent Lakes Municipal Staff has identified the Lakehurst Hall Trail system as a viable starting point for the initial implementation of the Trent Lakes Trail System, and whereas on May 2nd, 2023, Trent Lakes Council approved staff's Open Spaces Working Group Committee report and directed staff to prepare an annual work plan and budget not to exceed $200,000 annually. to the November 20th, 2023 council meeting. And whereas Lakehurst Hall Board presented a property improvement proposal to council on August 8th, 2023 to develop a portion of Lakehurst Hall property, the Lower Bowl, a municipally owned property. And whereas the proposed development of the Lower Bowl at Lakehurst Hall connects to the existing Lakehurst Hall Trail, which has been identified as a viable starting point for the Open Spaces Master Plan trail development. And whereas on December 5th, 2022, council approved a $10,000 request made by staff to be used in the 2023 timeframe for architectural or engineering drawings as a pre-planning measure for any municipal projects. And whereas no monies have been spent from the 2023 $10,000 allotment for architectural or engineering drawings. And whereas staff advised it was preferable that they take carriage of the proposed development of the Lakehurst Hall Lower Bowl to be incorporated into the development of the Lakehurst Hall Trail. Therefore, be it resolved that council directs staff to take carriage of the proposed development of the Lakehurst Hall Lower Bowl, which will be incorporated into the development of the Lakehurst Hall Trail, which includes architectural and engineered drawings where required, and the cost of said drawings to be drawn from the 2023 $10,000 of availability. And further, that council directs staff to present a conceptual drawing in cooperation with the Lakehurst Hall Board and costing as to the first phase of the Open Spaces Master Plan, Lakehurst Hall Trail Renewal and Lakehurst Hall Lower Bowl Development at the November 20th, 2023 council meeting.
Thank you very much for your very brief motion. I will call for a seconder on that. I see Councillor Franzen for a seconder. Any other conversation before I call for the vote? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Armstrong.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Lambton. I'm in support of this. The only thing is the date of the meeting. I think we have our meeting on November 21st.
Correct.
Or we could defer it and have it presented at the special budget meeting. I don't think we have a date for that yet, which would be in November.
Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. I believe November 20th is the budget meeting date.
Ah,
That's why.
so it is a special budget meeting on the 20th?
That's correct.
Perfect. Then I withdraw all of my previous comments. And
Okay,
I didn't have it on my calendar.
any other conversation? I have just one comment. I think this is a nice natural step of us moving forward with some of the plans that we spent so much time developing. And we all want our community centers to be used more, and this is an opportunity, I think, to help with each community center. So this is a step one of many. I thank you for the motion. And any other comments? I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor Faber. Council. Okay, we can move on to item 16 of our agenda, which is information items. Does anyone have any information items to share with us? Councillor Franzen, go ahead.
I have two. A group in Bobcaygeon is trying to establish a Mishkoda Center for Indigenous Knowledge. They had a fundraiser, which I attended. And it's an ambitious plan because they plan to buy about 4 acres from the Boyd Estate in Bobcaygeon to put up that center. And the other item I had was the Kenmount Journey for Health. The fundraiser, a walkathon, they raised over $12,000. The medical center, they announced that they're going to have a dental hygienist starting in September. So that's quite a move for that center.
Added services, that's very nice to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Franzen, for the updates. Anyone else have any more updates? Go ahead, Councillor Braber.
Through you, Mayor, just a verbal thanks from the Canada 911 ride that council supported. I got feedback from Jim Adamson, who's the vice president, and presented before council, and he sends his sincere thanks to council and the municipality for the support. And their ride concluded without any mishaps, and it went off without a hitch. So thank you to council again and the municipality.
Thank you very much, Councilor Braber. Okay, anyone else have any updates or, okay. We can move on to item 17 of our agenda, which is our closed meeting. We are with, sorry, motion. Okay, I would entertain a motion to go into close. Councilor Cadigan for a mover, and who would like to second the motion? Councilor Braber for a seconder. Okay, before I call for the vote, we will be going into closed for the Ontario Municipal Act, section 239(2), to discuss E, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local boards, in brackets duty. F, advice that is subject to the solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, in brackets duty. K, a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board, in brackets negotiations. I will call for the vote. We are all in favor? That motion is carried. We can now move on to item 17.2 of our agenda, which is rise from closed. I would entertain a motion to do so. The Deputy Mayor Armstrong for a mover and Councilor Raybrook for a seconder. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion is carried. Okay, we can move on now to item 18 of our agenda, which is business arising out of our closed meeting. We can go to 18.1, which is the adoption of the minutes from our regular closed meeting from August the 8th and our special closed meeting from August the 8th. Is anyone prepared to make a motion? I'm seeing Councilor Braybrook for a mover and Deputy Mayor Armstrong for a seconder. There we go. And I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion is carried. Okay, now we can move on to item 19 of our agenda, and we can go immediately to 19.1, which is the adoption of the confirming bylaw. Would anyone care to make a motion? I see Councillor Cadigan for a mover, and I see Deputy Mayor Armstrong for a seconder for adopting our confirming bylaw. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion is carried. We can move now on to item 20 of our agenda, which is adjournment. Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn? Seeing Councillor Braybrook and Councillor Cadigan for a seconder. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion has carried. We are adjourned. Thank you everyone for attending virtually and in person, and thank you to staff and council.